Right, this is the Networks Lesson 2 lesson. So what we're looking at now, in Lesson 1 we looked about the types of network and the different devices that you needed for networks. Now in this lesson we're going to talk about the two different ways of networking computers together. We have a network called a client-server network, and also we have something called a peer-to-peer network. And both these ways are different ways of us hooking up the computers so they work properly. So the first thing we'll cover is the client-server network. So there's client. Now, the first thing you have to understand is what is a server. Now, if you imagine a server is a big computer, okay? And what it contains is it contains everything that you need to know about the network. So it's a bit like school. We have all the user IDs, we have all the data, it controls how we log on, it controls all the backup, and it puts them all together in one place. Which means then we can actually sort out what we need to back up, what we need to do with it. And obviously if you are the system administrator, so there he is, if you are system administrator, all you need to do is interact with one place and it means it's done. At the bottom of the server there is, that is the worst one, at the bottom of the server you have a load of machines. There's my brilliant computers, there you go. And these are called clients, because basically the server is the boss and he looks after his clients. And so this is my server, and it's the boss and he looks after his clients, and the system administrator just looks after the server, and that means he can control everybody else on the network, which is really good, and it has its advantages. Everything is pushed from here down to these guys here, and it makes your life a lot easier when you've got a lot of machines to look after. Of course, the downside is that this thing is very, very expensive, and of course to set up one of these you could be talking around £6,000, whereas, and obviously £500 per machine, for example. So it could be and you need mad skills. Okay, you definitely need skills in order to run the server, and it's different to running a normal computer. Now on the other side of things, we have this thing called a peer-to-peer network. Peer-to-peer network. Now a peer-to-peer network is slightly different. How a peer-to-peer network is that if you imagine these are my client machines. There's my computer. These are all computers. And what happens is instead of shelling out £6,000 for a computer, the peer-to-peer for a big server, what you do is you hook them up so they all have different bits of data on each one. So this one might store all the accounts, and this might store all the data, and this might store backup, and they all kind of hook up together to work. And that way, obviously, and they all hook up and they all go different ways and they all share data between themselves, and that's a peer-to-peer network. Now of course if you've only got 2 or 3 machines hooked up, it's brilliant because obviously you can share the data between the machines and you're sorted, but there's no backup, or no centralized backup, or no central place. So again, the disadvantage is there's no central space to keep everything. So you've got to remember where everything is put. Okay, and of course there's no central backup and there's no other thing. But at the same time, it's like the budgie, it's cheap. And that means that obviously you can keep costs down. So in your home network, a peer-to-peer network will probably work, sharing data between each other, but not keeping everything in one main place. Now, we've talked about a bit about hardware. Well, we also need to talk about the software required to run a network, which is called a protocol. Now, when a computer talks to another computer, it needs to make sure it's talking in the same language. You need a set of rules in order to talk to each other. It's a bit like talking in German or Spanish. There are rules to their language. And in ICT, there are a set of rules to their language, and these are called protocols. Now, protocols, there are different ones, okay? The main one is the Internet Protocol. And this has a very common name, and you will have heard of this, and it is called TCP/IP. Now, TCP stands for Transmission Control Protocol, and IP stands for Internet Protocol. Now, you won't instantly need to remember that, but when I tell you what they do, it makes your life easier. Okay? TCP is responsible for the passing of messages. And if you think about the word transmission control, you're passing messages. I'm controlling what you are going to see, and that means that it's passing the messages. IP is responsible for how the message gets there. Now, the way you think about this is that you will have heard this term, an IP address. Well, an IP address is a unique address on the internet. So the IP address is a unique address. So what it does is TCP puts the message together, and this sorts out, well, it says, right, I want to put a message together and I want to send that from one side of the school to the other. So what this does is this sorts out how the message is going to get there. Well, it says, right, well, you're in that machine, and the machine over the other side of the school, well, that's got its own address. So we'll just make one up, 192.168.168.12.1. And it says, oh, right, I know that machine over the other side of the school. So what it does is it sets up the link between your computer and that computer. Then it passes the message in small bits across. Okay? And that way, if you know the IP address of any machine, you can talk to it. Now, IP addresses. IP addresses are software addresses. We set them in software, and what it allows us to do is it allows us to set up an address, and then we can use that address all over the place. And this is how all computers communicate. They remember each other's addresses, and then they chat between them. So when you're on MSN, it remembers MSN IP address, and it remembers MSN IP address too. And once you've got both addresses, then you can chat between each other. Okay, and it's how most communications work on the internet. The other type of address is called a MAC address. Now, a MAC address is set in hardware. And the difference between this is this one can't be changed. You say, well, what's the point of that then? Well, the point of this is that obviously if you have a particularly good piece of hardware, if you have a piece of hardware, then it means that it's got a set address in the world, and it means it's got a set number in the world. It's like having a VIN number on a car, and if somebody stole it, they'd know you stole it because they'd know, oh, that VIN number is associated with that car, so therefore you can't nick it. And that means that it's the same idea. Now, the last thing we need to talk about is how messages are sent. When messages are sent using TCP, we send them in little blocks. So we won't send the whole message at once. We'll break it down into little blocks, and those little blocks are called packets. And TCP controls how the packets are sent in little tiny blocks. Right, that's the end of that lesson because I've taken about nearly 11 minutes there. Now what you need to remember is that how TCP works by sending messages in packets, what the difference between an IP address and a MAC address is, the name for TCP/IP and how that relates to protocol, and also client servers and peer-to-peer networks. That's a lot of information for one lesson, but hopefully that'll all help for your exam.